Welcome to another episode of the Radical Hospitality Podcast. Today, I am super excited. We've got Ben Wolff. He is an industry leader and visionary of modern hospitality. He's been specializing in experiential stay. Probably seen him on social media marketing as the co-founder of Onera and Oasi, his management company. Ben has been instrumental in just redefining what landscape and upscale hotels look like. Onera, we'll dive into this a little bit in the episode. It's an upscale landscape hotel brand. It's achieving really significant milestones. I want to talk about this a little bit. It was one of the first to sell as a public REIT. Incredible. Brand recently is expanding. It's a location in Wimberley, Texas. Major $15 million expansion, I think. Open in 2025. So Ben Wolff, welcome to Radical Hospitality.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it and excited to chat.
I thought maybe just a good place to start. I think a lot of us that are in the hospitality world are probably seeing your success with Onera, maybe because you do so much, great social media marketing. But I'd love to kind of step back a little bit and, hear how you got started. I understand you kind of started in the short-term rental area. What did that look like? And how did that help, progress to what you guys are doing now?
I mean, I really got introduced to the short-term rental world, I would say around 2014-ish, and really kind of got more into it in 2015. I actually used to work for my now co-founder in Oasi, our services firm. He had a short-term rental like Airbnb management company very early on, in that 2014 timeframe. And I was doing some business development for them, helping them bring on clients where we would manage properties for them. They actually bought a boutique hotel in San Francisco that I helped launch with them. So I really got my first taste of it working for that company. And then from there, I started to build out my own portfolio. And I didn't have a lot of capital at this point. I was in, my mid to late 20s. And I got involved via lease arbitrage, as a lot of us do. So we would lease apartments or townhomes or, single family homes, and then we would sublease them on Airbnb effectively. And so that was great cash flow. We did it, started in New York and then DC, and we expanded from there before, some of those cities really started cracking down and passing regulation that made it harder to do it. But early on, it was very lucrative. And, I really learned how to build and kind of scale a hospitality operation from that experience. I started building a small portfolio of lease arbitrage units, and then I had a software sales job that was fine. I mean, it wasn't a passion of mine, but it paid the bills. And sooner or later, I started realizing that I was making more money doing less work with the short-term rental business. And so decided to quit my software sales job in April of 2018 and then scale it from a handful of properties under management to 200 by the end of 2019. So in a year and a half, we went from about 8 properties to 200 under management across about a dozen markets in the US and Mexico. That was interesting, scaling quickly. I mean, we kind of call it micro scaling because every market we'd have 5 to 20 properties typically. We wouldn't be, getting a ton of depth, 50, 100 properties. We were trying to cherry pick more so outlier properties in each market. So that was what we did early on, but it was very much an urban location play. And so when COVID hit, a lot of those bookings, evaporated overnight effectively in March of 2020 when everybody stopped going to cities. And that was a blessing in disguise for me. It pushed me to explore and ultimately develop this Onera concept, which had been kind of gnawing at me for a while, but the profits from the traditional short-term rental business were quite distracting. And, if that had kept going along, I don't know if I would have ever built Onera. So it ended up working out.
So you found something that's really interesting, that was incredibly scalable, this lease arbitrage during that period of time. What would it take to do one generally? And then what made that work then? Is it still working?
Yeah, how to get up and running with one lease arbitrage unit. I mean, it's quite simple. It's a lot simpler than getting a landscape hotel up and running. But yeah, you rent an apartment. I mean, we were upfront with landlords. Certainly once it became an issue with the city, it was upfront with landlords. Hey, this is what we want to do. Are they okay with it? Kind of build it into the lease that we can sublease and then furnish it. Design it nicely. Maybe even add some temporary walls to add bedrooms. We found out that higher bedroom count properties, especially in cities, were very high in demand and there was very little supply. So there's this massive supply and demand imbalance. So we tried to cater to, 4, 5, 6 bedroom properties in major cities. So yeah, we set those up, and then it was just kind of optimizing listings on Airbnb, Vrbo, all the traditional OTAs, dialing in, revenue management and pricing. And ultimately, I built out an offshore team in the Philippines. I think I was pretty early to doing the guest communications and kind of VA to the Philippines thing back in 2014, 2015, and then really ramped it up in 18 and 19. And we had 20 people over there by the end. So, but that was when we were scaling the operation. I mean, early on, you can get up and running with a couple lease arbitrage units with, a 1 month security deposit, 1 month's rent, and a few grand in furniture, right? It's a pretty low cost entry. I will say that arbitrage, I think, is shrinking, if not altogether gone. And most arbitrages do come to an end. I think that to make money at that, you really have to be doing it at scale today. And even those players had a big, a lot of them have had problems like, Sonder, Delmio, a bunch of these big, effectively lease arbitrage players, right? They're master leasing, and they're banking on this play of building a brand. And I'm not convinced that a standard apartment stay is all that brandable. I'm not convinced. I mean, we didn't try to build a brand when we were doing it. It was just, we were doing it under individual host names, and we wanted the properties to be well designed and a good offering, but we weren't investing heavily in the brand because we didn't think it was worth all that much. Now, on the unique stay landscape hotel side of things, I think brands are incredibly valuable because you have a unique value proposition, you have a unique experience, and you can create a story and a brand affinity for that product.
Let's dive into that a little bit. But before I just kind of summarize, first step, for you, it was building up a cash flow business, it sounds like, with arbitrage, not necessarily real estate holding, but you did build up a team that I assume you were able to then kind of leverage that team to then get into this real estate holdings, which, you used the form of landscape hotels. Was there an in-between space of real estate holdings that you got into in terms of were you guys actually purchasing, buying short-term rentals, or did you go straight from kind of a cash flow business into developing this landscape hotel?
We bought a couple of homes around that 2018, 2019 timeframe. But when COVID hit, again, they were urban. So it was like Louisville or Indianapolis or, somewhere more urban, but a more approachable price point than like a New York City or something. But still, those sort of secondary markets got hit pretty hard during COVID as well. We didn't have single family homes in some lake house or, more of a destination vacation market, which did really well during COVID. So because of the timing, the returns weren't great on the couple of properties we did buy. So I was less interested in it. And I just saw how little supply there was of these unique stay type experiences. And I knew somebody that was doing some of it on a small scale. I saw some of the listings and, early players that were putting out stuff that was interesting and somewhat unique, but I didn't even think was all that revolutionary and groundbreaking. So I was like, man, if these slightly unique properties are doing 2-3x the average revenue of just a cabin in these markets, what if I actually take it to the next level and put out something really amazing and inspiring? And that's what led to Onera.
I didn't mention this before we talked, but we're kind of in that unique moment as well. We found that out during COVID. We built out a really unique short-term rental Treehouse on a piece of property. We expected to probably hit the average ADR, which was 200, and we're hitting 350, and we're just really surprised by that unique stay. And we're scaling up to do a boutique hotel. It's been a whole venture for us to figure out that scale. It sounds like you had scaled a large management company, and you came into that with, again, a good cash flowing business. It sounds like an asset of team, maybe a couple of real estate assets. Let's dive into Onera. So when you're looking at developing a project of this size scale, can you break it down a little bit? What was the land cost to get in? And then,
yeah, I'm happy to dive into the story from the beginning with Onera. And you asked a little bit about the cash flowing business and how much that helped and all the rest. And I don't want to gloss over that because it definitely did help quite a bit and gave us a leg up. And when I talk to people, I'm very upfront about that. I mean, we had a business that was generating, not quite, but close to $1 million in free cash flow by 2019. Now that evaporated when COVID hit, but we had really pretty tax returns to get a loan based on. We were able to use that business to help collateralize the construction financing for Onera Fredericksburg. And that was really valuable. That income from that business and just showing that we were operators and knew how to run some sort of hospitality product was really helpful. And then the other piece of that, I had made a bunch of people money that we were managing for, right? Like we'd help them find units, we'd furnish them, we'd then manage them. So these became our first investors because they trusted us. And it was a simple phone call to raise that first $1 million or so in equity. Me and my partner each put in $100,000 or so. And then we raised the remaining $800,000 through 5 or 6 guys that were our clients.
I work with a lot of teenage kids through Young Life, and I've had a lot of conversations about, hey, Zeke, I want to make some passive income. And my comment is always, why don't you first learn how to make some active income and add some value to the market? And then we'll talk about passive. And so I think it's incredible. You guys built a good business that's in the hospitality. And so I wanted to kind of emphasize that. Now, to then leverage that and to start doing a real estate holding, now you've got a good basis. So, well done on that.
Yeah. It ended up working out. And look, there's a lot of things that I learned from my first real company. And I had other entrepreneurial endeavors before that. I mean, I was an entrepreneur, I feel like, since I was a senior in high school with various breaks along the way when I had kind of fallen on my butt and had to pick myself back up again, as inevitably happens as entrepreneurs. With that first company, that short-term rental management company, I mean, I was still in hustle mode, right? It was me and 20 offshore people in the Philippines and one remote PM in LA. And I was still doing pricing. And I remember I was going to get married, right? I did get married. So before my wedding in 2019, I knew I had to hire a GM to help oversee things because if there was a big guest issue, I couldn't have to interrupt my wedding for a guest problem. This work off or very, work in the business. Yeah. So that was my first big hire was this remote GM. And she really changed my life and allowed me to ultimately, start focusing on and build what became Onera because that business was starting to click and kind of run without me. So that taught me a lot. And I never looked back since then. I mean, since then, it's how do I hire?
You had 200, can I pause you there for a second? You had 200 units, 20 remote VAs. The first real management hire came at that point or were any?
No. I think we were probably about 75, 80 in.
It's quite a bit of units that are on your shoulders. And assume the VAs, you can have various level of talent in that. What type of roles were your VAs at that point?
I mean, look, we had this one just absolute rock star, Charis. I mean, she still works in that business, and she was just phenomenal. She referred so many people to come work for us. I kept promoting her and raising her pay because she was so invaluable. She was my first incredible hire, A++ hire. There was a couple other people that were probably right below her level. And then a number of folks that were, solid, but not at that more kind of senior VA or really, A++ player level. And just seeing how valuable she was and the incredible work she did. With my next company, I only wanted to hire people like that were of that.
Real high level, what is the team role structures? Did you have, were they all guest service or did you have
We did a lot of outsourced work as well, which allowed us to scale quickly. So we had outsourced cleaning, we had outsourced maintenance in every market. We would find a really good cleaning and or maintenance group in each market, and we would work with them heavily, give them a bunch of business. I had our remote GM in LA that I hired in 2018, I think it was, and she helped manage the whole operation, right? Once I was kind of trying to get myself out of the weeds a little bit. And then we had, of the 20-person offshore team, all of them pretty much did guest communications to make sure we were available 24/7 and responding as fast as possible. I think our response times were sub 2 minutes, which is still what we try to achieve across the board, whether it's an inquiry or a guest that's staying with us. And then some of those same people, the higher caliber, more capable, better paid VAs, like Charis and some of the ones I was describing would help me with client host statements. So some of that, more accounting side of things. They would help me with pricing and implementing pricing strategy that mostly came from me. And then I had, a great designer, a great, local photographer in each market that would help us on the listing marketing side of things. Yeah, but that offshore team did so much of the business. And then my GM in LA really kind of sat between them and me and made sure the whole thing was running smoothly so I could go and work on finding land and ultimately developing Onera.
Now let's hop into Onera. So what was the backstory on getting into Onera? How did you guys pick a piece of land that would work well? What are the kind of the basics look like? How big a piece of property? Where was the locations? What did you guys use to determine that this was going to work?
We started looking, I think it was, a couple months into COVID, probably around May or April, May of 2020. And I knew that I wanted to be relatively close to the property. Just first development project, wanted to kind of keep eyes on it, knew there was a lot of risk there. So needed it to be within, an hour to 2 hours of where I lived. And the Hill Country was really the best market around Austin to do this kind of thing. When you looked at the data, I mean, we used AirDNA data. Was probably the main thing that I was using at that time was AirDNA data and pulling comps and seeing, which sub-markets within the Hill Country were doing better and worse. In terms of the concept and what really pushed me to do Onera, there was a few different factors. There was COVID, right, where outdoor hospitality started booming. City and urban rentals got hammered. So I wasn't as incentivized to keep trying to build this, urban short-term rental business. I had just gotten off a road trip with my wife for our honeymoon. We did a Southwestern road trip in an RV, all around, Southwestern US, California. We hit like 12 national parks over 6 weeks. Really had a ball and re-fell in love with the great outdoors. I was living in New York City for 12 years for most of the time prior to that, and waking up to these beautiful mesas and hoodoos and canyons. And I think it like reinvigorated something in me. But all the issues with the RV were not a great part of the experience. That's what led me to want to do something a little more upscale, a bit more frictionless, more amenities, all the kinds of home and then some. And when I looked at the market, there was auto camp that was coming up and under canvas that was relatively established. And it seemed like more of a, I would say, mid-tier experience, right? Temperature control was like a maybe. It was a small unit. It did not feel upscale at all. And there was still an element of roughing it. And we wanted to take it to that next level of have this integrate seamlessly into the experience, very inspiring stays, feeling like bringing the outdoors indoors with, massive floor to ceiling windows and integrating the unit into the landscape. But you'd have your private hot tub, your kitchen, your beautiful bathroom, his bed, right? Like, your Nespresso machine, all of the comforts and then some. And that's what led to, this concept of Onera, really, was that combination of factors. So that led me to want to build something like Onera. And then it was, all right, let's pick a market. I need something close to home. Hill Country made sense. From there, looking into the AirDNA data, Fredericksburg and Wimberley really kind of jumped off the page. And what I was trying to find was these couples units, let's call it a 1 to 2 bedroom unit or smaller, that was massively outperforming the market. And I like to think of this as revenue per square foot. So people talk about price per square foot a lot. And I knew what I wanted to build wasn't going to be cheap, right? A structure elevated 30 feet in the air with massive floor to ceiling glass windows and, vaulted ceilings and, crazy roof pitches and all this kind of stuff, right? We did have some comps that was like, okay, hey, this is a couple's unit, a relatively small cabin that is somewhat unique. They're calling it a treehouse. It's really like a cabin that's kind of cool next to a tree, right? Or this is like a cool little cabin on a hillside overlooking an amazing view with a pool, right? But it was kind of a kitschy, cute, unique cabin. So I was like, okay, there are these small cabins doing $100,000 a year, $150,000 a year, right? These like pretty high numbers that I might see on like a 4-bedroom apartment or something in New York, like pretty considerable numbers. So it seemed like there was an imbalance there, and an opportunity. And I also thought, can I do this better than them? And it didn't feel like the competition was that strong, right? Like, could I elevate it higher in the air? Could I make it more sleek and modern? Could I, make it even more unique and one of a kind? And could I add some more amenities? And all of those answers for me were a resounding yes. And so that's what kind of pushed me into, I was looking in Fredericksburg, I was looking in Wimberley. I was also kind of looking in Dripping Springs. That was a third market we looked at and saw some properties, which is like the wedding capital of Texas, as you probably know. But doesn't have enough lodging. There's a ton of venues, but doesn't have enough lodging. So it made sense as a market. If there's wineries around, you're probably in a good spot for a unique stay, romantics couples getaway type experience. Winery was a good leading indicator for that. Even if the wine isn't all that great, which is, what I hear in the Hill Country. I don't drink, but supposedly, the wine's not that great. But the experience is more about what it is and the views and the nostalgia of, kind of the pioneer town vibe that you get out in Fredericksburg. Anyways, I was looking in these three markets. We went through due diligence on a couple of them. I learned some hard lessons on that front. We found a property in Dripping Springs, probably spent about 10 grand in due diligence before realizing that the subdivision deed restrictions weren't really going to allow us to do what we wanted to do, even though we were being told otherwise before that. So had to learn to dig into that stuff much earlier in the process. But learned that lesson and then found a property in Fredericksburg that
let me dig into that just a little bit. So that's something, again, you're looking for a piece of land. The zoning is pretty important. I think these landscape hotels can be done in different ways, but in general, you've got to have a path forward. So what was the zoning that they had, and what was the plan? Why didn't it work? What did you find different and learn that you were looking for when you went to Onera?
Yeah, so it's not zoning. And remember, Texas is pretty build friendly, right? I mean, there's still things that you have to watch out for and do right. And there's this perception that you can do whatever you want, which is not the case. But this wasn't zoning because in all but 3 counties in Texas outside of the city, there is no zoning. So from that perspective, you can do whatever you want. Now, how they stem development in Central Texas is through water rights, on-site sewage facility rights. So, water and septic are the 2 big ones. And water is really the big one once you start getting into a bigger project. And fire safety, you have to still comply with IFC regulations, like being every unit has to be a certain amount of feet from a road that a fire truck could access. So like 150 or 200 foot hose span can reach that unit. So there's things like that you have to watch out for. But it was just a subdivision, right? So it was a private subdivision that was developed, and in the deed, they had restrictions that said, you couldn't do a lot of the things that we wanted to do. So it wasn't zoning. It just had to do with the deed restrictions.
The deed restriction on that property. Real quick on the water rights. We just did a glamping site that we had to go in and purchase water rights in Colorado. How does it work in Texas? Is there available augmented water, or is it you buy it if you buy it with your land? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're lucky, there's private co-ops, and if you're really lucky, there's city water in certain spots, right? But if it's not financially feasible to connect to one of those 2 options, then you're looking at digging a well, finding the best well driller that you can, because that can be an expensive endeavor and a risky endeavor, right? You can not hit water, you cannot hit sufficient flow. There's many issues with that.
Once you get the water, do you have the rights to be able to use it, or is that separate?
It's separate once you get to a certain scale. So technically, if you're running overnight accommodations, more than just maybe a single STR, that may not qualify. But if you have multiple units on a site, you get kicked into a commercial well. And then it's just the tier of your permit, right? So what tier do you get kicked into? 1, 2, or 3? 1 is much easier to get. 2 is harder to get. You can have a hearing in opposition with the water district that sort of, controls that area, if you will. And tier 3 can be very, very hard to get. So, and, require, hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees and that sort of thing.
We see here the well we just did up in our Grant site, which is going to be for 9 cabins that got built, 9 RVs, and then we'll do 9 tree houses. So the 27 units. I think they spent around $100,000 to get the legal fees and just augmented water, and then $30,000 to put in the well. And then we had to do a water treatment facility. That was probably $50,000-$60,000 by the time we put in. So I mean, well into the $200,000 mark. What type of numbers were you talking for Onera by the time that got done?
So Onera Fredericksburg was much easier than Onera Wimberley because we kept it under 15 connections, which is by definition in Texas, that's a public water supply. Okay, so if you have 15 connections or more, you get kicked into this public water supply classification, and you have to do things to a much more robust standard. And there is, storage and testing. In a lot of cases, if you're 15 connections or more, you're also going to get kicked into that tier 2 permit where you want, however many acre feet of water a year, however many millions of gallons of water a year. Once you figure out what you need on that front, then you have to go to the water districts and go through various hearings and try to get approval for those permits. So for Onera Fredericksburg, our whole water setup was sub 200 grand. It was probably closer to like 125, 150. But at Onera Wimberley, it was probably closer all into $500,000. But now that is quite a considerable amount of legal fees. That included these massive storage tanks that we needed for fire suppression. So like I think we have 2 tanks between 15 and 18,000 gallons. So those are really big water tanks that are quite expensive. And then you have all the water treatment facility you have to create, like this pretty good sized pump house with all the treatment in there. The storage tanks, like I said, the water conveyance, it adds up, right? But for Wimberley, a 28 key, $22 million landscape hotel, we were right around $400,000 to $500,000 all in for the water system.
So that's 28 keys that took for that system. How many acres is Wimberley?
Wimberley is 20 acres.
Roughly what was land cost and build cost to build that out?
Yeah, for Wimberley, land cost for that one was about $1.5 million. So on, it's typically the land is a much smaller percentage of the overall construction budget certainly than an urban property or like a coastal property or something like that. So it's pretty low on the land cost side of things. And then the construction budget was in like around 16 million. And the rest of it was soft cost, design, architecture, engineering, a number of different FF&E, things like that.
Who'd you work with on architecture?
We worked with design and conceptual, and through most of the developing of the construction documents, we working with artistry. They're more of like have you heard of them?
I haven't.
Okay,
are they based out of?
They kind of split time between Spicewood and California. But yeah, they're like more of a smaller boutique shop, and they actually do a lot of like bespoke, custom, like one of a kind treehouse type style stuff.
Yeah,
that's how I initially got connected to them, and they design built a couple of the units that are near Fredericksburg, and helped me assemble and create some of the prefab units we had. And they ended up doing the design and conceptual for Wimberley. But I hired a much more robust commercial GC for that one, and man, that was like the best decision I ever made. That GC, was probably the biggest reason, outside of like my initial vision and the financing and all that had to happen, finding the property. But outside of that, this GC and his team is one of the largest reasons that we were able to come in on time, on budget, and really have a successful project. So I'm going to hang on to him and every project that I do moving forward. Hopefully, knock on wood, he'll be a part of it.
Yeah. Did you guys go through a bid process to select GCs?
So we didn't end up doing the design bid build thing. And, I'm very grateful that we didn't, because everything I've heard, and I sort of went through it, to some extent, like it wasn't a hard bid for Onera Fredericksburg. It was during COVID. So there was so much volatility that pretty much nobody was doing hard bids, but I got an estimate from this design build firm. And I got an estimate from the GC that I ended up working with at Onera Wimberley. And the design build firm thought they could come in, 10, 15%, maybe even more under what this GC, actually, no, I think it was even more than that, like 20% under. They ended up coming in like way over what his estimate was. And he just had a more realistic, less delusional estimate. And so I learned my lesson on that front and worked with him on the next project. And I just came to learn that the whole like design bid build thing, like there's so many messed up incentives in that process. So like the GC is incentivized to like not tell you about things that they know are missing from plans or things that you're not thinking about, so they can hold a change order in their back pocket and hammer you with that later. So a lot of GCs going to these projects, like already earmarking 5 or 6 change orders that are going to make the project a lot more profitable for them. And you'll have, contractors out there with boats named change order or something like that, right? Instead of doing that, we decided to take a collaborative approach with this GC and really co-developer, JB Chisholm, founded by Banks Chisholm. We took a collaborative approach where they were very involved in the initial conceptual pricing, and then ultimately value engineering that had to happen to make the project buildable and financially feasible. So they were involved from the very beginning, and it allowed us to have a successful project. I mean, they knew so much more about the project. They knew levers that we could pull to make it work from a cost standpoint. They knew what I cared about early on. So yeah, there's just so much value in that. So we work, fixed fee basis with them. They have a fixed fee based, roughly based on the size of the project and the scope of what they're doing. And so they're highly incentivized to finish quicker, right? Because time is money. For them, but they're not incentivized to cut corners and do things cheaper that, we're going to have to then pay for later. If there are savings, that can be an owner decision that, savings will get passed through to the owner. They're going to be very transparent about things that they think that we're missing from a cost standpoint early on. So I just think it's a much better setup, and I've loved working that way.
So, to summarize what you said there's kind of 3 common methods, and it sounds like you got to experience all 3. So, design build, it's either usually a GC led with an interior, in-house architect, or vice versa. Sometimes architect with an in-house GC, and you're trying to squeeze and figure out the cost and the design all together. There's the traditional design, you design it, and then you put it out to bid to multiple contractors. So, design, bid, and build. Hopefully select a contractor that gets everything in that GMP, guaranteed maximum price, and you hope that they're not hitting you up for change orders, but that's a common problem in that process. And then the last, what we might refer to that as like a CMGC, a construction manager, general contractor, and there's various ways to negotiate the fee. It sounds like you did a negotiated fixed fee for their service, and then would it be, so that would be their costs, and then open books for the rest of the subcontractors, kind of a cost plus situation. Is that fair on that last?
Effectively, outside of their fixed fee, they work on a budget, right? And I'm banking on their reputation, right? And in my experience with them, that they've always been on time and on budget, which is so hard to find. You have to have that trust and relationship. You can't go in blind with somebody with one of those kind of agreements, because they can tell you it's going to cost X, and if it goes way over, you got to pay for it, right? And they still have their fixed fee. But because we have a long-standing relationship, because this person came highly referred to me, I knew their past projects, I knew how much the on-time, on-budget reputation mattered to them. And just my experience with him to date made me comfortable with going in that direction. So it was a little bit of a leap of faith for sure.
Yeah. So you just mentioned, I think each 3 of those, there's reasons, there's 3 categories, and people excel on different ones because sometimes they work in different, project types. I think the overall, compounding lesson there is, know the contractor well, look at their reputation, and have they been able to perform and deliver. You could probably slide them honestly in any of those 3 categories, but maybe for this, project, that cost plus, the MGC, is a real good way to go, because you got them involved early, probably helped with budgeting. And then it was transparent enough that you kind of feel like you trusted their numbers coming in were good.
I mean, I talked to him about GMP, right? I mean, early on, I was kind of trying to lean toward that direction, just because that's what a lot of people do, and it's been kind of industry standard. But I have to price in so much risk, because these projects are so bespoke, there's so many unknowns. So I have to kind of, hammer that number pretty high. Whereas, if we trust each other, we've already done a project together, right? And if there's savings, they can flow to me. If there's things we have to move around in the budget, we can very transparently and openly talk about that. And it was just much more of a collaborative environment. And based on their reputation, I had faith that they were going to do everything they can to hit the budget, and that I was going to get hammered with a GMP if I went with that with them.
It looks like there's various structures. You had kind of the quintessential, you see a lot on your Instagram, is these beautiful kind of round tubular structures that cantilever out. Are those site built? Were those prefab? What was the construction type out on the site?
Yeah, so Onera Fredericksburg, that one was actually built by Artistry in their warehouse, and they brought it out and kind of rolled it out. I have a video of it onto the structural steel formation that's out there that holds it up. So that one was pretty cool to see. Onera Wimberley, the site was so challenging, and there was so much grade change, and the access was not as easy as Onera Fredericksburg. So modular prefab, like it just didn't make a ton of sense. We were going to have to spend so much money on the level of like cranes that we would need and that sort of thing. And it was going to be very challenging to set those units. I mean, it was challenging enough to set the prefabricated structural steel, that a whole unit was going to be even that much more challenging and costly. So yeah, we went site built on those actually in Wimberley.
So Wimberley was site built?
Yeah.
And Frederick was all prefab, or some of it was?
Some of it was, yeah. And actually most of it was because we actually ordered a bunch of these kind of kits and prefab units from China, which actually ended up being a big disaster. It was like the biggest mistake I made of the whole project. Just like, shitty quality, delays, no instructions, no transparency. I mean, it was like a big lesson. So we ended up spending a ton of money like retrofitting and trying to make those units work and hit this like upscale, more luxury aesthetic. It just ended up like costing probably the same, if not more, than it would have been to source locally when all said and done. And we were delayed like 2 months.
Yeah, I've heard that so many times. Like everybody starts with prefab, and either they go through it and it's a nightmare, or we end up at the other end and let's just stick build it. But on the next one, I just had Devin Descano who did the A Lodge up in Winter Park, and they had the same issue. It's a 24 unit, really cool. They prefabbed it and had all sorts of like site fit issues. So it's a great idea and concept. I'm sure people have done it well, but it's not as pretty as it looks.
Yeah. And we've wanted to do another modular project for a while, just work with like a really reputable, like North American manufacturer that we can easily go to the plant and meet them and get comfortable and see the product and have really good QC before we even accept shipment. Like there's just so many things that we didn't do that would be more challenging to do with China anyway, that we're definitely going to do when we do modular again, which we will.
Good. Yeah. I mean, I think, like I said, I think this project has been done well. I think there's equal amount of projects have been headaches. So what kind of cost per unit, or can you say that maybe the tubular units, like what type of cost per unit does run at?
I mean, it really varies. Yeah. Depending on the unit. So Onera Fredericksburg, like our all-in cost per key was anywhere from like probably $250 a key to like $500K a key, I would say. I will say that the units that we spent more on, the more unique, bespoke, interesting, inspiring units, like they might cost twice as much, but those units are doing 4 times the revenue. For example, of some of our, lessons, more traditional or just not quite as unique, not quite as upscale accommodations. So it's definitely worth it, in my opinion, and from my experience to build something that's cooler and more unique. And I say this a lot, like build fewer, better units and usually you'll be better off. They're more differentiated. It's easier to manage, smaller operation. And you just have a competitive edge of being much more one of a kind.
Yeah. When you're doing a master plan and then financing this, did you do it all as one master plan, one loan, one construction process, or did you phase this and build out individual units and test market, or did you just go for it on the whole concept?
So I would say like we kind of went for it. And part of that was I didn't have these massive sites, right? I mean, I was working with 6.5 acres in Fredericksburg, 20 acres, decent size in Wimberley. But it didn't feel like there was enough room to build units and then build more without just entirely disrupting the experience of the people that were there. So it's like, if we were able to, it felt better to just kind of do it in one swipe. But I am looking and actually working on some phased projects now with some development partners that are bringing, me and JV Chisholm and Banks, the GC that I work with in, and we are doing phase developments because they're on 100-acre tracks or 500-acre tracks or, much bigger tracks where you can more conceivably do phases and not massively disrupt the existing operation. So it does depend. But we went more full bore and on smaller projects. So we felt pretty confident. Okay, we're going to do 8 units at Onera Fredericksburg. And we did end up adding a few more, but they were very easy to kind of pop in place container homes. So it wasn't like doing a big phase. It was, much more light construction and kind of, we just drop them in. So that was more feasible and didn't impact the existing operation all that much. Wimberley, it was 28 units. We did it all at once. Again, it wasn't this massive key count. I felt pretty good and confident in terms of that unit number and being able to still achieve a solid occupancy and ADR and all the rest. It wasn't like that much inventory given the amount of travelers that go to the hill country. So we did that, and we are expanding Onera Fredericksburg now, but that was an after the fact expansion. So we ended up buying the property next door, and it's one of the reasons that the public REIT that we ended up selling to back in 2022, that they liked the deal because there was expansion potential. We had locked up the land next door, are now about halfway through a $15 million expansion to Onera Fredericksburg, adding 23 more keys and some pretty unbelievable out of this world unit types.
Gotcha. Okay, so just kind of we jumped around a little bit, but like backing up on timeline. So it was Fredericksburg first, right? And that's the 8-unit, 6.5 acre site.
Yeah, it was 8 units originally, and then we added ultimately 4 container home units.
12 unit on that 6.5 acre site.
Yep.
Then you guys bought Wimberley, did that all as one phase development. That was like a 16 million, 20 acre site.
Yep. 20 acre, 28E, all in, it was actually 22 million. The hard cost construction with, the GC fee and all that was 16.
All in 22. And now you're coming back to Fredericksburg and you've got the adjacent site that's going to do a larger $15 million expansion. How big of a site is that?
It's actually the same 6.5 acres. And one of the reasons we were able to achieve more density on the Fredericksburg site is that there's just a lot more dense vegetation. So there's more trees, more forested. And if you have more trees and more vegetation, you can fit more units in a smaller space and still have them feel really private. Like if you're building desert and a unit is 300 feet apart, it might feel closer than a unit in a dense forest that's 60 feet apart, just in terms of privacy and seclusion. So
let's look at the denser site where you're putting, it's a 6.5 acres. How many keys on this next phase?
23. But one of those,
it's almost double what you have on the other one.
One of those keys though is an 8-unit lodge. So it's really one big structure.
Okay, so that helps get it up a little bit. With these landscape hotels, a guest comes in, I assume I just go and I have private access to it, get an Airbnb code, unlock the door. Am I getting met by the on-site staff, or is it all remote managed?
It's remote check-in. Yeah. And that's what we think the guest wants in our case. So we don't think it takes away from the experience. It's, pretty seamless. You get your code, you get some really good directions to how to get to your unit. And, you get to go in, have your private, secluded, often couples getaway experience, which is the vast majority of our guests. But yeah, they want a secluded, inspiring stay out in nature and, don't necessarily want staff running all over the place and have to deal with a check-in desk in a lobby and things like that. So, we think that is addition by subtraction with that one.
No, and I can vouch for that too. Our Treehouse, which is a similar, to some of the things that you guys have here. Remote check-in, very little. We have a management company that takes care of it. Guests come in, they're quiet, and it does really well. We've been in the preparation of doing this 22-unit boutique hotel, and I kind of came in initially with this mindset we would do the remote management thing, and as we've developed and learned, even I think in that tighter situation where you got multiple people coming into a spot. We're going to be next to Red Rocks amphitheater, so it has a lot of potential to have people coming in that are, drunk or, high or whatever after a concert. We have just felt like you got to have that management on site. So it really is. I've learned how much that management adds, if you're doing the on-site management. I am definitely looking at what you guys are doing over there to go back to the Treehouse and the simplicity of it, where if it could be managed remotely, guests love it. You're in the woods. I don't need someone to hold my hand. If I can check in the door, I'm usually good. So that's kind of cool to think. What does the remote management look like for you guys on a project like this?
Sure. And first, I just want to clarify, we have on-site staff and we have think time staff, and that is growing actually at our bigger sites for sure. And we actually have built nice on-site housing for them, which is a really nice amenity. And it's just really important in some of these more rural locations to have somebody on site and available. So yeah, in Wimberley, we have 2 one-bedroom suites. Once the Fredericksburg expansion is built out, we'll have 2 there as well.
Are they the cleaners as well, or are they just management and yes, experience?
So right now in Wimberley, we have a GM, an assistant GM, a head of operations and kind of maintenance. And then we have, I think, 5 full-time cleaners. So it was more just specifically about the lobby and the check-in that we just thought was unnecessary and just not really the experience that we wanted to provide. So just that piece of it, we took away and we give them remote check-in. But there's somebody available if they have problems. And that's what we found. Like if there's an issue, that these kind of guests, especially with the price points they're paying for our stays, they want someone who is going to handle it quickly. Whatever it is, more towels, more coffee, door code's not working. Like they want someone who can respond and get there quickly. We do have for management for the Onera properties, we still leverage the offshore, guest communications team that I've had so much success with to have those like sub 2-minute response times and 24/7 coverage. So we have that team, and then they ping the local team if there's ever something, whenever there's something local that has to be done on the ground. So it's a good situation where like the local team doesn't have to get bogged down in the messages and the calls and things like that. And they can kind of just be deployed for things that need to happen on the ground.
Great. Yeah. And you had that team in place. So again, this idea of building, you kind of started with that STR team. Yeah. I love how that kind of leveraged to this next group. Sounds like you still needed to build out an on-site management team. So I'm sure there's a process in doing that and getting the right people in place.
Not easy to do. And with Fredericksburg, we tried to just do it with like a one-man show. It was very hard to do that. And with 8 units, it's hard to afford more than a one-man show. So that's why, having 15, 20, 28 keys starts to make sense. So you can have that better hospitality, better, tighter operation, and you can afford to have a few full-time people.
And I suppose between Wimberley and Frederick, are those close enough where you're doing any overlap, or those completely separate staff groups?
They're pretty separate, but we've always thought that once we have the Onera Fredericksburg expansion online as well, like we might have a higher paid, sort of more experienced chief engineer type role, like head of maintenance that could float between the two. Certainly like group sales and the director of sales likely would float between the two, because we don't really need a full-time person in that role at either spot. So there are certain roles that make sense, but our GMs are dedicated to their location. Our AGMs are dedicated to their location. I'm sure if we get in a pinch with cleaners, we could try to leverage some from the other property, but it's a little over an hour away, so it would be in a worst case scenario.
Can we back up a little bit? I want to talk a little bit about like capital raising and funding and financing these deals, and maybe start with the beginning. I'm sure things get easier as you move forward. I've done one. The next one probably is funded a little bit different than the next, but the first one where you didn't have a track record of a couple of successful projects and a REIT sale, how did you go about putting that deal together? What did kind of just high level numbers look like, and how did the financing and capital raise go?
I think I mentioned earlier on, right? The initial capital was really like friends and family money. We were raising like sub $1 million. My prior company was putting in about $200,000 for me and my partner's contribution into the project on the equity side. And then we raised, a couple million in debt. Was effectively the stack from a local bank that was had me and my partner as personal guarantors, had the business that we had, Blink Hospitality, the short-term rental company, was also a guarantor. And so, we had plenty of income to show to be able to get that loan. So that was the capital stack on the first project. After that, actually, within about 6 to 8 months, we raised a small real estate fund that allowed us to buy a small hotel in Palm Springs that we renovated and reactivated. And then also that became the equity in Onera Wimberley. So we ultimately rolled the Onera Fredericksburg property into that fund, and we paid, those initial investors got like an outsized piece of that fund, basically got some very high interest for coming in early. And then we're ultimately equity owners in the fund.
As you're going through that, like, who are you learning from in this process? And did you have mentors that were showing that you had to do this? There's a lot of figure out yourself, I'm sure, but who have you been learning from to figure this out?
Definitely a lot of figuring it out myself. I have my co-founder actually in Oasi, the services company. So we do management and social media marketing and design and development consulting for other projects outside of just our own. So he was a mentor before he was a co-founder. He was the founder of that short-term rental management company, raised some money around that, had raised, some money. My dad obviously has always been a mentor, but it was definitely trial by fire. Like I didn't have somebody that was shepherding me through the process of how to raise money. I didn't join like a hotel mastermind group and that person became the co-GP or something like that. I didn't do that. I didn't, for whatever reason. So I had to kind of learn on the fly. But I will say a lot of capital raising, some things are in your control and some things are not. So when I was first raising money, it was a much easier environment to raise capital. Until very recently, like the past year and a half, with the interest rate crisis and how, relatively risk-free, high single-digit returns that you could get, I think made it much harder to raise capital and large sums of capital. So the environment plays a much larger role than I realized before, getting into development. Like I figured, my first raise would be, way harder than my second and my third and all the rest. And sometimes that's true, but it's also dependent on the economic environment.
You brushed over Oasi a little bit. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about that and who are the people that, that company serves and how people could work with you guys in that area?
Yeah, happy to. So Oasi is really, we're a innovative hospitality company trying to help these properties better serve the modern traveler. So we help hotel, resort, glamping properties, landscape hotels, unique stays, all of these kind of properties. We effectively have a 360 service offering. We can help with development and design consulting. Sometimes we partner on those projects. We have a hotel property management arm. And then probably our hottest service right now is our social media marketing and digital marketing more broad service. Just because we've had so much success there and we're able to drive, 80% plus direct at a lot of our properties. And we've been able to grow these social media accounts and these audiences very fast in a lot of cases. And really just, we have quite a bit of edge in that department.
And that's one thing I've learned is huge. Some of these OTAs, especially when you get into the commercial level, you're looking at booking.com, Expedia, are 18, 20%. You're much higher than your short-term rental, Airbnb. And so, getting that direct booking, serious numbers, and can be some higher ROI. What type of investment would you, on a project like Onera, be making in the Instagram and social media aspect to get those direct bookings?
Yeah, I'd say it ranges anywhere from $5,000 or $6,000 a month to $8,000 or $9,000 a month, depending on how much content we're getting, how many influencers we're hosting. They're paid. If we're doing any sort of Instagram boost and putting any paid spend behind what we're doing, even though the vast majority of what we do is organic content and organic social. So that's roughly the range. Which
would put that into perspective on the amount of revenue, like a percentage of revenue spent would be for Onera or some other projects.
The range that I typically give, it really depends on the size of projects and how much revenue that you're generating. But it can be anywhere between 3 to, I would say, 8% of your top line. And where Oasi can really make sense as an option for folks typically is when they're going to be $1 million in annual revenue is typically where we're going to make sense and can really help supercharge that. I mean, really, we're trying to target even, bigger properties, bigger accounts. We recently had our first flagged sort of, good size 130 room, 4-star resort, Alila Marea, which is just outside San Diego. We brought them on around June of this year, and they were our first more traditional kind of hotel resort that we took on. And, they're generating, tens and tens of millions of revenue a year. And so they have bigger budgets to invest more in content and to, if we can impact their top line, even a few percentage points in the overall dollars versus what we're getting paid, there's a massive return there. So we are working more and more with bigger clients with bigger budgets, just because you can invest more in content, and if you invest more, you can do more.
Yeah, and I would say the payoff comes from that pulling down the amount that you're paying to larger OTAs like Booking and Expedia, if you start to get that direct, then it starts to make some real financial sense really quick. So
I think additional occupancy, additional guests that you're getting that you wouldn't get from those channels that are looking on social. I know that they're less price sensitive. Like our ADR is actually higher for direct bookings through social than it is on OTAs. And that's not because we're priced higher. It's because they're less price sensitive. They're booking higher demand, higher price days.
yeah, that's great. Well, Ben, this has been incredible. Thanks for, taking the time, dropping a lot of knowledge, give us some insight on the behind the scenes of what you're doing. If people want to connect with you, what's the best place for people to do that?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Ben Wolff, 2Fs. On Instagram, I am Ben Wolff. And on Twitter, Unique Stays Guy. So check me out there. Hop on the newsletter. I put one out once a week talking about this stuff. And we try to add as much value as we can.